Today I'm out in the lawn. I usually like to say that I'm out in the shop. I didn't make it to the shop today. I'm out in the lawn troubleshooting a does not crank condition on the 2005 F-150 5.4 liter Lariat. The voltage gauge reads 11.8, which is normal. It's not drawing down at all. My two Optima batteries are connected together in parallel, and if I had a dead cell there or a shorted cell, I would think that that would be drawing down on me, and it'd be a lower voltage than that. So it doesn't appear to be a battery issue. It could be a neutral safety switch issue or a key issue. Let me try it one more time and see if I can get it to crank. Nope. And I don't hear the starter solenoid. I do hear something, a fuel pump trying to kick in, but I don't hear the starter solenoid kicking. So let's try the neutral safety switch with the key on so I can get it out of park. On a little bit of a hill. Put it back in park. Still nothing. So it could be the key switch. So let's go down, use the multimeter, and I have a lead. Let's go down and check voltage down on the starter, and then when the key's on, check the voltage. I need a lead to do that. I don't have a helper today, so I got to do it by myself. So let's go down to the starter. Okay, so here we are under the truck. Here's the starter, the positive battery voltage that's continuous, it's on all the time, and here's the switched power going to the solenoid, so both positives. And then right here on the transmission, you get a different angle, that is the ground coming, that's a battery cable ground coming right to the base of the starter for a ground to the transmission bolt right there. A multimeter up here, you can see it. Go to reading voltage, turn the light on, pick a good ground, clamp to, and then right here, get up here, maybe I don't have a great ground. It's 8 volts. Let's fix my ground a little bit. Okay, there we go. Got a better ground, and poking at it, 11.95. That's about what we got up on the gauge upstairs, so up in the passenger compartment. So we got battery voltage there, and of course nothing on the other terminal until the key is turned, hopefully. So let's connect our jumper wire. The alligator clip just gives me a little more on my positive lead of my multimeter. And then let's find my end of my lead for pick a ground. Here on the door. And turn my light back on. Okay, here we go. We're set up inside the truck. Let's see if we can zoom into the multimeter a little bit. A little bit of a glare on it. Let's see if we can turn it. Let's give it a try. There we go, about 11 volts. So that tells me everything's working except for the starter. One more time. Key. and it does seem, puts a load on the truck. It's trying to turn the starter, so it puts quite a load on the truck. So look at the dome light. There is, I actuate the key and hold the key. It really pulls the battery down. That's really draining the battery. So that starter is trying to turn, it's just not able to. Okay. That's it. I've determined it's the starter. We need a new starter. You know, sitting on the lawn on these wet lawns has not been good for the truck. It's really rusting underneath. Really causes corrosion on those electronic components like the starter, and the four-wheel drive actuation solenoid got replaced quite a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, because the truck does sit on the lawn. After putting that load on, we still got 11.8 on the voltage gauge here on the dash. I did a video to install these 2 voltage gauges. I have this one wired so that it's on when the truck is off, and this one's on when the key is on. Originally intended to have 1 gauge for each battery, a main battery and then the auxiliary battery, but I didn't do that. I just left the 2 batteries connected in parallel, but I wanted my USB connection to be powered when the truck is off, so that's why I left this one active when the truck's off and this one when the truck's on. You look at the starter from a different angle from the front of the truck, you can see the positive lead coming in, and then the switched lead to actuate the starter right there on the solenoid. You can see how corroded it is, and one thing you could do is you could try tapping the solenoid, see if you could get it to work. I wished I had somebody that could turn the key for me to see if that solenoid was attempting to move at all. It doesn't sound like it is, but it might be. It's really hard to tell from inside the truck. But try tapping on it with a hammer. That failed to do anything. So definitely need a new starter. If I wasn't sure or didn't have my multimeter, you could put a screwdriver from the large positive connection over to the switch connection on the solenoid and see if you could get the solenoid to bump and the starter to bump. That would also indicate whether the starter was good or bad. That is the troubleshooting portion of this video. Now we'll do a starter replacement on the 2004 through 2008 F-150 5.4 liter. If you watch my videos in the past, you know I'm not big on removing the negative ground cable from your battery, but in this case you need to, because your starter has a hot lead to it. This is hot all the time on this one. The orientation of it, of course, when it's in the truck is more like this. So it's the bottom stud is hot all the time. And of course, this is the switched one then, but this is the keyed power right here to actuate the solenoid. So your solenoid is down on the starter. So your power cable right here, of course my truck has been modified, so it's got these military style connectors, but it's this cable that goes into this harness here and goes right down to the starter down here. It's this cable that goes into a Y. So it's this wire on my truck. It goes right down there. And then there's also a ground cable that goes down there that connects to the one mounting location on the starter. So it's hot, so you got to remove the negative ground cable to start with. All right, the tools that you're going to need to replace your starter: some light, lots of light is always good, a wire brush to clean up your electrical leads down on the starter, the main power lead, the positive battery cable that comes here. That's a 14mm nut, and then the nut that goes on this switch connector is a 10mm. So I'm using a 10mm socket on my 1/4" ratchet, a 14mm for these two connectors, 13mm for my mounting bolts, and then extensions. The trick to getting off starter bolts is to always go with plenty of extensions. Sometimes you have to go way to the front of the engine to get at it, to get a wrench in an area where you can turn a wrench. And oftentimes it's handy to use a swivel, but for the misalignment, it's good to have a universal joint here. But like if you have like mine, if you have a swivel that's a universal joint like this, it's handy to use a piece of masking tape to wrap this, because you don't need much swivel there. And as you don't have control over the end by the starter, you have to reach in with an extension. So wrap that with electrical tape, because you don't need much swivel there. That'll keep it from flopping in all directions and frustrate you. Of course, good nickel anti-seize. Under the truck, I'm going to start with the electrical connectors. So here's the 14mm battery cable, positive battery cable, and here's the switch connector. These are the three 13mm head size starter bolts. Notice the one that I'm pointing out here is the top bolt. It has a little bit of an extension on it before it gets to the threads, so that you don't get improper alignment, because you are installing that bolt blind on the top of the starter. I'm going to go into minute detail on how to remove these bolts in just a minute. When I was talking about these universals, I was really talking in general for general starters, ones that you can get to the front of the engine with your ratchet and long extensions. These 1/2" drive and even this 3/8 drive swivel is too large a diameter to work with this starter. You really need something much thinner to get along the sides of the starter. You can see with this bolt, you want to be aligned with the bolt along the starter, and this is really too fat. Will it work? Maybe, but let me show you in detail off of the truck how to do this and the proper tools to use that'll make life much easier for you to do this, because it is a hard job. It's hard to see, and I'll describe that in detail also. Instead of using a straight extension, this is a straight extension. This is what I like to use because I like to be in control. And when you use these wobble extensions, you're not in as much control, and typically you want to be straight on to a socket and you want to hold it here. So as you're using an extension, you want to hold it here, or at least back here when you're turning it. And with this job, you can't really hold it. And with a wobble extension, you have even less control than with the straight extension. But instead of a universal joint, because you can't get straight on to the top bolt, you need to use a wobble. And you might as well go ahead and use a wobble extension for each of the bolts. And here's this extension will work for all but the top bolt, and you add a second wobble extension for that to give you a little bit longer length because you're offset. And what that does is it just gives you a little bit more wobble and a little more misalignment with this, and it gets you off to the side of the starter in the front. But let me talk about the starter and how it's mounted a little bit first, so you can understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the tools. So here's the old starter out of the truck, and it's mounted like this. I position my camera with this contrast in the back so you can see this. It has three mounting bolt holes on the flange end, or the bell housing end, and of course the drive gear and the solenoid that we've talked about already. So in the truck, it's positioned with the solenoid down, and with this mounting bolt hole location, not quite at the 12 o'clock, just about at the 12 o'clock position, and then this one at the 9 o'clock, and then of course the bottom one just about at the 6 o'clock, but not quite. It's more off at a 7 o'clock location. This is the one, the top one is the most difficult because there's no room on the left side. If you're in the truck, the driver's side is the left side. This is the engine and oil pan side. There's no room to get a hand in on that side. There's a room to get your hand in here, but there's very little room. There's only about 3 or 4 inches here on the passenger side or right side, and there's really only 3 or 4 inches on the front of this starter up to that cross member to get a hand. There's enough to pull the starter out of the transmission or the bell housing rather, and pull it out and get it out and down. There's room for that, but there's only room for really one hand. If you can position this hand and kind of feel, and then position your other hand to ratchet, but depends on which way you're facing in the truck. That's if you're facing towards the driver's side in the truck, you can get a hand this way, but you really can barely just reach this bolt hole on the top, or at least I can with my hands. So what you want to do is, and the other thing in the transmission, on the engine, the back flange of the engine has a little curvature to it. Let me show you a photo there. This is a view with the starter removed, and we're looking from the front of the truck towards the back of the truck. On the left hand side is the frame, then the exhaust manifold, and then the starter mounting location there in the center, that round hole, and the engine block on the left. Let me zoom into this for you. This is the slot in the engine rear flange that I was talking about, that if you know it's there, you can use it to help you guide that socket onto that bolt. But you can tell how tight it was to the starter by the discoloration there in the flange. That can either hurt you or aid you in positioning your socket for this, as long as you know what to look for to get this bolt located. So now that you know that feature, and the other thing that's an obstacle is there's a bolt that's hard to show. I don't know if I can show it in the photo, but it's hard to see. There's a bolt that's on the exhaust manifold that's right here in this position on the starter, about midway. So you have to have an offset to get at this bolt. It needs to be offset like this in the truck. That's why you need the swivel, because you can't get straight onto this. If that bolt wasn't on that exhaust manifold, you could get straight onto this, and then you wouldn't need this little extension. You could get by with just the long one. And for the other bolts, you don't have that. You can use this with just a ratchet on the front of this. You can get by with just a ratchet on that. Same way on the bottom, you can do that too. But with this one, it's not quite long enough when you're offset like this. So let me show you. Pick it up here. You can see that the base doesn't quite make it far enough. The ratchet interferes with the starter here, or the starter interferes with the ratchet, so you need a little bit more on that one. Let me break into the video for just a minute and show you that bolt. If you can see my cursor on the screen here, this is the bolt I'm talking about, and I misspoke. It's not on the exhaust manifold. So here's the exhaust manifold, here's the engine block. That bolt is actually on the engine mount. It's a mounting bolt for the engine mount going into the engine block. And let me show you a different view. So here's the bolt again, and now that you know where it's at, if you look at it in this view, you can see that it's aligned with that bolt on the starter. So this is a zoomed in picture, so you don't have the proper perspective. You got the this cross brace in the way, so that's about halfway along the starter is this engine mounting bolt, and You can see how it's aligned and that your extension has to be offset on that starter bolt. So let's talk about wobble extensions. This is my favorite set here, and I don't use it very often. I use it only when I need to, so it's like new. You know, a few of them are used, but the rest of them, I don't believe I've even used the rest of these. This is a Harbor Freight set, and it's kind of nice because instead of just being a wobble extension, you can also push on it, and once it clicks, it becomes more solid. That can be a hindrance in our case here. If you're trying to locate that bolt and you push too hard, you want it to wobble. You want it to maintain the wobble. So you don't want it to be fixed like that because you need it to be offset like I discussed just a minute ago. But it takes quite a bit of pressure to push it to make it fixed. But I like that feature about it because, again, I like being in control. Again, you push on it and then it's solid. This is a cheaper set. This set's about $12 or under $15, and I don't believe that that's a on sale price. But you know, everything at Harbor Freight goes on sale at one time or another. But this is strictly a wobble set, and it's nice to have a variety of different lengths for jobs. So you, especially in this case where you need to be the exact length because you only have 4 inches in front of the starter and a few inches on the side, and you have to be able to get your ratchet in there. So it's nice to have multiple sizes. That's why I bought this set, even though it's a cheaper set. And I do like this other set with that feature that can lock. And this is a more expensive set. I don't know what this Icon set goes for. And this one has 1.5, 3, and 6. I'm using the 1.5 and 6 on this job. This is I don't know, 1.25 and 3 or something in this other set. This one is 1 3/4, 3, 6, and 9 in the 3/8 drive set, but also includes 1/4 and 1/2 inch drive wobble extensions in this cheaper set. Before I leave extensions, I also use an impact socket. It's a 6.3/8 drive, 13 millimeter impact socket, just a regular 6-point. I'd recommend 6-point so you're not stripping out your head on your bolts, so it fits tight, and you're less likely to strip out that head than a 12-point, especially for this job. I know they're a class 9 metric bolt, but and they're hard, but you don't want to strip off the head of that top bolt, especially that you can't see. But you're using a short socket instead of a deep well. That gives you the correct overall length with a 6-inch extension. And especially with this top bolt, it's helpful to put a little wheel bearing grease on the bolt head to help it stick into your socket so it doesn't fall out on you. Let's talk about ratchets then for a minute. You know, this is my go-to ratchet when you're talking 3/8 drive. I normally use Craftsman. This is my first Harbor Freight Icon ratchet. I purchased it for the fine teeth. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Normally I want to have a Mac tool or Snap-on, or most of my stuff is Craftsman. But this Icon ratchet is a nice little ratchet because it does have the 90 tooth, and you're limited on the amount of throw that you have in there. So again, you only have from the width of the starter and about 4 inches on the side, and then 4 inches on front. So you only have a limited throw on your ratchet, and that's where the fine tooth ratchet like this Icon ratchet comes in handy. Do you hear the difference, how much I'm moving, and the fine tooth in it really is a nice feature, and that's handy to have. And when you're doing the top bolt, this pivot head is nice so that you can either be this way and be behind that cross member, or you can go this way and be in front of the cross member. So there are advantages to doing both when you're taking off that top bolt. Like I said, this is a tough job, but it's doable. You can do it. You know, it's hard to see, you know, you can't see that top bolt and it's hard to feel, but it's hard to get the placement of this socket onto that bolt because of its location, because you can't get your hands up in there. And it's tough because most of the time, depending on where your body's positioned, you can only get one hand on your ratchet and your whole mechanism, so you're holding it with one hand trying to turn it. But if you can put a finger up there on it to help hold it and make sure it stays on and put some pressure towards the bolt head, that's a big advantage. So whether you're doing it here trying to push, or if you can get a finger on it back here and try to push, there's a big advantage to that. Make sure that that socket stays securely on that bolt head. Okay, so that's everything that I can think of to tell you about the 5.4 liter starter replacement. That goes into as much detail as I can think of. So I hope that helps you, and I hope you're able to tackle the job and it doesn't give you very much trouble. You know, you can see how rusted mine is. It's lasted 226,000 miles. As far as I know, I bought my truck used, but as far as I can tell, the starter's never been replaced, so it was due to be replaced. So that concludes the video. If you found it helpful, let me know in the comments, and please subscribe. I look forward to your comments.